Good evening, everyone. I am the Reverend Dr. Timothy Tyler, and this is.
Dr. Dwinita Mosby Tyler. Welcome.
Did you hear that, Dwinita?
That's it.
I love it.
Reclaim.
Reclaiming the name.
Yes.
We want to welcome you all tonight to a special edition of Race Talk. We started Race Talk in August of, I believe, 2017, right after the Charlottesville, Virginia white supremacist violence that took place. And we decided that we needed to create a space of grace. Is that right, Nita?
That's right.
Space of grace.
We needed to create a space of grace. We knew that it would be important to start normalizing these conversations around race so people weren't so afraid of it.
Right. And so we decided to create a space of grace where people could learn and unashamedly talk about race and racism and white supremacy. It also is an opportunity for us to talk about and to teach about systemic racism. And we've over the years have led cohorts in looking at old systems and reimagining what old systems would look like when they become new. Tonight, we begin this special edition of Race Talk University. I believe it's probably the first time that we've ever been virtual. So I don't know what virtual means. I think it means you're just floating in the hemisphere somewhere. But needless to say, we are virtual and will be virtual until such time as the pandemic allows us to be in person. We want to invite those of you, many of you have been asking about Race Talk University, when it's going to start up again. It is a shorter version virtually. We have 5 sessions, and we'll start the first Race Talk University on March the 8th. And so you can go to, and we'll put it up later, you can go to shortercommunityame.org and find the application. And we're asking you to please apply by the 28th of February, and we will get back to you. And so I want to welcome you in advance to Race Talk University. Tonight, Dr. Dwinita, we're going to be talking about the insurrection, white supremacy on steroids. Before we start the conversation tonight, we have a short video that we want to show you. And so sit back and pay attention.
Mayhem in the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday as swarms of protesters supporting outgoing President Donald Trump stormed the building in an attempt to force Congress to undo Trump's election loss. Police drew guns and fired tear gas after pro-Trump protesters marched through the halls of Congress. House members were told by police to lie on the floor and grab gas masks under their seats. Police said a woman had died after being shot at the Capitol. The National Guard was also deployed to the scene. Some lawmakers live tweeted the dramatic lockdown, one calling it surreal, another, Dan Kildee of Michigan, saying, quote, "This is not a protest, this is an attack on America." The chaotic scenes unfolded after Trump addressed thousands of protesters and repeated false claims that the election was stolen from him due to widespread fraud.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's death involved.
Trump also applied fresh pressure to Vice President Mike Pence, who had been presiding over the joint session of Congress and had to be escorted from the Senate, to unilaterally reject state electoral college votes.
And I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so.
Trump later posted a video on Twitter in which he repeated his unsupported claim that the election was stolen from him, but called for peace and told his supporters to go home.
This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people.
Outside the Capitol, members of militia groups and far-right groups, some in body armor, mingled with the crowds. President-elect Joe Biden said it was an unprecedented assault on U.S. democracy and called for the siege to end.
It's not a protest. It's insurrection.
And the head of a business group that represents 14,000 companies, including ExxonMobil, Pfizer, and Toyota, urged senior U.S. officials to consider invoking the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office. Washington Mayor Muriel Bowers ordered a citywide curfew that began at 6 p.m.
Wow. Dr. Dwinita, I'm traumatized every time I see that video.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is traumatizing.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of something that we talk about a great deal in Race Talk University, and that is the fact that slavery wasn't that long ago.
We talked about it often. Slavery wasn't that long ago. You share with me a couple of conversations that you've had with groups who people who said, why can't you all get over that? Uh, as we talk tonight, we want to talk about what we've talked about in the past in context of this insurrection that took place at the Capitol. What does that have to do with slavery, and what happened that day that brought slavery back up into the picture?
Yeah, I think a part of what we struggle with in this country, I think, in many ways, it's what we struggle with even in communities and organizations, is we make things like slavery so abstract
Yeah.
and so far away that we can't make it relevant around what's actually going on in today's society. And the insurrection, as a matter of fact, is a duplication of other things that have happened in our U.S. history: the storming of buildings, the burning down of cities. None of this is new. This is a recall.
Look at the picture. And I know we showed the nice video. There's some not so nice. There are a lot of videos of this event that happened, this insurrection that happened. But just imagine, I think one video I saw, there was a noose hanging right outside the door of the Capitol. Then we saw the man walking through the Capitol with the Confederate flag. And then I heard some conversations last week from aides of a lot of the Congress people who were saying that as they were on the floor and as they were locked in their offices and as they were hearing the mobs, it was almost a reenactment of slavery when the white slave master was going through with the dogs looking for the runaway slaves to kill them.
Yeah.
And so, Dr. Nia, this whole event. I guess the question is, it's interesting how white people want black people to get over slavery, but it seems like there are parts of slavery that they haven't gotten out of their system yet.
Well, that gets evidenced anytime I see someone with a Confederate flag that we're not over it yet. We've got this slide that we use quite a bit that I want to share with the audience that makes the institution of slavery a little bit more recent. A part of what we struggle with is the recency effect, where we tend to just focus on things that are right in front of us, and then we don't remember to tie it to the things that have happened in the past. And this particular image shares with us that slavery isn't as far away as we thought, and that in many ways, when the institution of slavery in its formal sense ended, then we simply just moved into other iterations of it. And I would argue that we are in iterations of it today in 2021. When you look at our prison systems and beyond, those are iterations of that original system of slavery.
I agree.
So this image helps us a lot to see how we started in slavery and moved into Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, the Black Lives Movement manifest and highlights for us the work that we still have to do around white supremacy and internalized institutional and systemic racism. And so it's just a reminder to us that things are not as far away as we purport them to be.
Absolutely. I look at this graph and it reminds us that actually the time that we're living in now is a shorter period of time.
Yes.
And so we're very close to we're still very close to slavery. We're still feeling the effects of the trauma, and we're going to talk about that later, about how that's affecting us. But as I say, when people get over it a long time ago, I guess my point is that if the children of the slave master remember all of the things that they used to dominate the slave, then I imagine those who are the children of the slaves are still traumatized and still have in their spirits that misery and that pain.
Well, we have people that were enslaved in this country physically and then the after effects of that have been the enslavements in our psyches, this oppression in our psyches that was born with us. So we still have work to do in this area of what the institution of slavery, I think, caused in our country. We can stop sharing the image now as we talk about this a little more deeply. You know, one of the things I want to invite the audience to do is I want you to start thinking about, no matter what color you are, the recency of slavery in your life. Like, let's don't talk about it being 400 years ago. Let's just stop that rhetoric right now. Let's talk about the recency of slavery in your life. What's your story? And to invite you to be thinking about what your personal story is. It's real personal, reflective work, but it is a part of what we call race talk, is that you've got to get to your own stories first before you can understand the stories of others. So we invite you to be thinking about what your story around this is all about.
Right. I'm amazed sometimes when I'm talking to my mother,
Mm-hmm.
who remembers her grandmother, who remembers those ancestors who were slaves. And so we're still living, breathing, and talking with people. Of course, in our church, we have persons who are one generation away
Mm-hmm.
from slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't 500 years ago, and it's very recent,
Very recent. Very recent.
along with all of the trauma that goes with it.
Yeah, when I talk to audiences, I always say one of the biggest offenses that you can have in this conversation is to diminish the recency of slavery in the lives of Black people in this country. And so when you diminish it, when you question it, when you say, I don't know why we're still talking about this, and that was so long ago, and what does that have to do with today? That's an affront to any Black person when you do that. So a part of what we learn in Race Talk University is the meaning and the impact of our understanding of these things. And this is one of them. We are so close. You know, you always hear me tell the story of my great grandmother, whose mother was born into slavery. When I was growing up, she used to tell me the stories that her mother shared with her. I didn't learn about slavery in a history book. I learned about it from my great grandmother. And so it's very recent to me and very real and very much a part of my storyline.
And all the evil of slavery showed up that day on January 6th at the
Yes.
Capitol. That, another thing, Dr. Nita, as we looked at that video, I want us to sort of hash out and talk about the whole aspect of white supremacy as law and order.
Yeah, let's go to that. Law and order. I mean, we keep hearing law and order, and then it shows up in the context of white supremacy. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that a little bit. It's interesting how this crowd, mostly white people, who we've always been led to believe these were Trumpsters, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, our former president, big law and order guy, respect the police, love the police. We need law and order, and this country is about police and law and order. Dr. Dwinita, that day at the Capitol, some of the most offended and egregiously attacked people were the police. We know one officer lost his life. And I just wanted us to talk about that for a minute. I heard, because I'm a pastor and I don't say bad words, I don't cuss, so I won't say what they were saying, but they were really
watch out for the lightning strike.
Disparaging. On a good day, I don't. They were really disparaging the police. And you know me, I'm the first one to say speak truth to power. And I believe that there are a lot of systemic problems with policing. We've talked about this often, about how in our history, the police departments were oftentimes in charge of capturing the slaves. And so I know the problems with police, but what I saw that day at the Capitol was hypocritical activity. I saw the same people who have been disparaging quote unquote liberals and progressives for disrespecting the police. And I saw full force disrespect of police. I saw the murder of a police officer. We even saw police officers being beaten with flags. And so, Dr. Nita, I just wanted us to kind of spend some time talking about the hypocrisy of white supremacy, and also talking about the lies of white supremacy.
Yeah, let's take down the slide that's on the screen right now, and let's get into this a little bit. I almost feel like we're in alternate universes sometimes.
Sometimes.
We hear messaging that says one thing, and then the very people with the messages are doing the opposite of the message, which
Yes.
is what you just described. As much as in this country, 2020 really illuminated big issues and concerns and policing across the country. And then the conversation of law and order came up, and then the murder of police officers happened. It's an alternate universe.
It's an alternate universe.
Yeah.
It was a prime example. I often say this too. I often say that white supremacy is so hell bent on staying in place, and we'll talk about this more later, that it will eat its own.
Yeah.
In order to satisfy its appetite. And that day we saw the law and order people out of order and lawless.
Yeah. Yeah.
And imagine if Black Lives Matter protesters would have killed the police.
Well,
at the
first of all,
Capitol.
I don't know that we would have made it into the.
Well, we have made it to the
Capitol.
Capitol.
Yeah,
That's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole nother conversation. You know, the other thing about this this notion of being in an alternate universe is, you know, I want to try to bring it from the nation's capital to things that you might even experience locally. I often think about the conversations that were happening heavily in 2020 around Black parents having to teach their Black children, particularly our Black boys, about how to navigate and operate with police.
Absolutely.
And the number of times that I heard white people say to me, I just can't believe that you have to do that. Like, I don't believe that you have to have conversations with your children. That's an alternate universe.
They can't imagine that you have to have a conversation with your children.
No, it's this cultural and experiential disconnect that I think people that are oppressed and people that are not oppressed have. In some ways, that probably was playing itself out at the nation's capital too, when you have an experiential, a cultural, a knowledge disconnect between people oppressed and not oppressed. Then you see activities like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Very disturbing. We've oftentimes said in our Race Talk University that America has never not been racist.
Right.
America, hear the phrase, America has never not been racist. I've noticed a lot on my Facebook feed, a lot people who are saying get rid of the Confederate flag. That's an evil flag. Someone said, I want to reclaim the Stars and Stripes. I want to reclaim the American flag. And one of the things that we have noticed as we have looked at this situation is that there has been as much violence, if not more violence, that has happened under the Stars and Stripes. Maybe more than under the Confederate flag. And so this notion of make America great again, and we've been hearing that for the last 4 years, make America great again. And the question is always thrown at the people who say, make America great again. At what point was America great? Was it during slavery? Was it during the Middle Passage? Was it during was it during the Civil Rights? At what point was America great? And how do we make America great again? The answer is America has never not been racist, And we've never lived under a flag that did not persecute BIPOC people, Black, people of color, and indigenous people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that, oh, this is so hard for me to say and so true all at the same time. Has been assaulting BIPOC people from the very beginning. It has been a part of the national fabric of what we've done.
It was the assaulting of BIPOC people that was a part of the birth of America.
That's exactly
It was
right.
the stealing of land, the stealing of culture, the raping,
stealing of people.
the stealing of people. I don't know if you've all seen the Lando Lake butter box. Dr. Nita showed it to me the other day. They thought that they were doing a great thing. They've taken the Native American off of the Lando Lake butter box. So now it's just land. And somebody said that's just like history. They took away the native, they took away the indigenous person, and they took the land. They kept the land. They kept the land.
It's still on the butter container.
It's still on the butter container.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a history of doing that. But I want to go back to something that you said, like these intersections of flags.
Yeah.
We saw the Confederate flag, the U.S. flag, and the Trump flags flying in tandem.
Dr. Dwinita, what is a Trump flag?
Well, it just says Trump.
It says Trump on it. Okay.
It just says Trump,
It
or
says-
Make America Great. By the way, he didn't invent that. Reagan
That was Reagan.
did that.
Yeah.
So, but those three.
Not that that's any better,
Well,
but
yeah, those three flags were flying in tandem, and we should talk about what that represented for the rest of the country that didn't see either of those three flags being representative or supportive of them and their lived experience. Like, what did that do? If you want to talk about a national divide, look as close as your flag's flying. And think about symbolically what that meant to so many people in this country.
we saw an insurrection where all three of those flags became symbols of hate and represented hateful activity. We haven't mentioned it yet, but even the person who walked through the Capitol with a T-shirt on that said "Camp Auschwitz,"
Yes.
you know,
How-
demeaning
yeah.
the Jewish experience in the concentration camps. That, along with those three flags became traumatizing symbols of hate. And I take that back. Maybe they didn't become it, but they were lifted up as symbols of hate. And we know that throughout our history, they represent the cruelty, the pain, the murder, and the death that white people have perpetrated on BIPOC people.
Yeah. I mean, I this line that former President Trump said over and over again sticks in my head. He just kept saying, "We will never give up. We will never concede." And I got to tell you, that just took me straight to the Civil War almost. That's the kind of language that we heard and the narrative that we heard. But this conceding, this notion that you are conceding, is a conversation around power and what happens when the grips of white supremacy begin to slip. This notion that we're conceding or we won't concede comes up even more.
This is why we're still fighting this fight, because that's the nature of white supremacy.
Yeah.
We will never give up. We will never concede. We'll morph into something different. I was listening today about this $1,400 check, this $1,400 that everybody seems to be excited about. But you know what? If they send me $1,400, but they refuse to change these white supremacist systems, then when I spend that $1,400, I'm still gonna need help, because that system is still gonna be designed to keep me out and to keep me under and to keep me down.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, I do think there is another thing. You know,
But you can't have my $1,400. I just want to put that on the record.
I'm just
Go on.
saying.
Okay.
That's a whole nother workshop.
Another workshop.
There is a part of this conversation that I always like to dredge up, and that is when we talk about white supremacy, systemic racism, institutionalized racism. One of the things that I find is people can't always put their finger on how it shows up today. They know what the words mean. We get it. And we get the history of these things. But when you try to bring it forward to describe how these things are showing up in today's system, that's sometimes where I think we run into a speed bump. Like when you say systemic racism or institutionalized racism, tell me what that is in a system today is the conversation for us to be having. We're very grounded in the past. I'm glad that we are, because people need to know where we came from and the source of this stuff.
Yes.
But what is relevant is to be thinking about how what happened in the past still is tentacled to what's going on right now, and to help people to understand what it looks like and how it shows up in systems today is really important.
So, Dwinita, how would you unpack that?
So I always believe if you just take one fact from the past and roll it forward, you can begin to think about the connections between a past atrocity and how it's still showing up today. So I always go backwards and come forward. I call it roll it forward.
Okay.
So let me name a couple of things. So let's talk about poll taxes. Now, you know what poll taxes were designed to disenfranchise Black voters.
Right.
You didn't have any money, you couldn't vote. So guess what? The plan worked. People didn't have money. Black people, poor people, people that are not even in the system of politics could not vote because of the poll tax. Now, that's illegal, but roll it forward. What do we have in place today that might be directly attached to what poll taxes were designed to do? And that's the question. So what do you think? Voter suppression.
Voter suppression. And there are several Republican-led states that are working right now on laws to stop that tremendous thing that happened in the last election.
Yeah.
People actually voted.
Yeah. So if you roll it forward, then you can attach to what polling taxes were designed to do to gerrymandering.
Right.
You can assign it to voter suppression, in some cases redistricting. There are things that are present today with a direct relationship to that. So think about this. Think about the fact that Black people could not patent their inventions.
Right.
Right? Weren't allowed to patent your own inventions. So
Right.
roll that one forward. What do you think came out of that? Like, just generally speaking, what do you think may have come out of the fact
Some
that
white person got the credit and the money
bingo,
for a Black person's invention.
bingo. So that has happened all over the place. The traffic light, the ironing board. I can go on and on and on with inventions that Black people invented and could not patent. And then the source now, the inventor,
Right.
has a white face.
Has a white face.
So that has all kinds of implications, like getting in the way of your ability to have generational wealth. If you couldn't get your invention patented and your invention soared in the marketplace, you just got your generational wealth squashed.
Absolutely.
So I want you to think about that as an example. And we can go on and on. Healthcare. We know that even in COVID-19,
Wow.
this fear and distrust of the healthcare system is not just made up in the minds of Black people. It comes from a source from the past.
From the past.
Lots of sources, Tuskegee experiments. We have Dr. Marion, a very studied gynecologist who practiced his surgical techniques on enslaved Black women with no anesthesia. That's how he got to be famous in his techniques. That's who he practiced on and how.
Because Black people's threshold of pain was higher
And
than white people.
no regard for Black bodies. So fast forward is my point. Fast forward historical facts into 2021, and you'll have great examples of how systemic racism is still present. That's how you do it.
We will never concede.
We'll never give up.
We'll never give up.
Yeah.
We'll never concede. We'll never give up.
Mhm.
That's interesting, Dr. Nita, and I agree with you that we have to look at how this translates into our own communities. When you say that, I'm thinking about a very controversial conversation that we've had in the past. And I think that it's going to always be worth bringing up again. But in the same context of looking at how all of this that happened at the Capitol translates into our own communities, can you just say a little bit more about what we've talked about in the past as it relates to it is going to be the responsibility of white people to continue to lead the movement to tell white people to cut it out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a controversial conversation, I think, always about who leads what and when. And I think sometimes that's just situational. But I got to tell you, I've been on earth long enough to tell you that white people being on the sidelines of this work, it's not effective. We've already proven that. Here we are, 2021. We're talking about the same things, quite frankly, that we were talking about when I was 10 in the segregated South.
Wow.
So the strategy has to shift. And the strategy must include us working in a collective to get this work done. We need white people on the front lines of talking to white people about what needs to be eradicated in this system, which is racism and white supremacy. Who best to do that than people that hold it or to hold that power?
So Dr. Dwinita, please help me again now, because I've heard it in the community quite often from white people who've been saying that we're going to take our lead from people of color and Black people, and we're going to let them be up front at every protest, and we're going to wait for them to tell us how they want us to get involved. Just unscramble that for me, please.
Yeah, I'll try to unscramble it. Some of it is the nature of calling things allyship, because that definition is in fact what an ally would be doing, is taking their lead and their cues from the people on the front lines of the work. And I'm not saying there's not a place for that.
Sure.
What I'm saying is there's not a place for a lot of bystanders.
Yeah.
And that's a model that we've been in for a long time, is to be a bystander to something, waiting to be called up to be told what to do. I think that we are in crisis, and we don't have the luxury of waiting for people to be told what to do. In some cases, you have to have a strategy around what to do. If white supremacy is what we're talking about, you don't need me to tell you what to do. If you know what white supremacy is and you're the holder of it and you're perpetuating it in systems or in communities, you know what to do. It's your responsibility to do it. So not everything will be told to you. At some point, we all have to have the wherewithal to know what we need to do.
Now I'm going to play I won't play the devil's advocate. The devil doesn't need an advocate.
No, the devil doesn't need an advocate. Right.
Dr. Nita, I'm white. I'm not racist. I don't have a racist bone in my body. Why do I have to even deal with this?
Yes. So I want everybody to stop saying that.
I'm the least racist.
So there's something encouraging about the first part of that conversation, the fact that you don't think you're doing something that's racist. But by the way, your whiteness in this country means that you're the holder of racism.
Your whiteness, write that down. Your whiteness means you are the holder of racism.
Yeah, you're it. You're the catalyst of it, the holder of it, the symbol of it, and we haven't destructed it yet. Yeah. So that means that it's still present and current in you. And so I think, I'm not a white person, so I certainly can't speak for white people. I think every white person has an opportunity to explore that I'm not a racist conversation, because until you've eradicated racism in the systems, not just in your heart and your mind, because if all you're thinking about is your heart and
wait a minute, you're talking real fast now. Until you have eradicated racism in the systems, healthcare system, education system, housing system, religious system, until you have played your role in eradicating that type of racism,
right,
then
you're racist.
You're racist.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt that. I'm not white, and I felt that just now.
Well, I mean, I want to say it's not personal, but it's personal. I think we've got to stop thinking that to be a racist is a character flaw. it's a power differential in this country. And so to say I'm not that sometimes just gets at how you feel about yourself. I'm kind. I have Black friends. I can't be racist. Racism is what we're after here. So if you can try to shift how you're thinking about this into the system that in many ways we've done nothing with, that to me delineates whether a person is a racist or not. We're not talking about your heart and your mind and your kindness. We're talking about what have you done? What action have you taken to get this out of the system and the power differential that we continue to suffer under?
And I think it helps. I've heard this often, and I am a proponent of it, that even if we were to buy into the notion that you're not a racist,
Yeah.
every white person at some point in time exhibits racist behavior.
People do what the system does.
And the system is racist.
Right.
You're going to exhibit it. And so it is our responsibility and it is your responsibility to call out that behavior.
Mhm.
And we're going to have to see some behavior change and some system change.
Yeah, I dig behavior change.
You get ready to.
I really dig system change.
Yeah.
So I think if you are just talking about behavioral change without committing to the system change, it's not sustainable. And I'm not making that up in my head. That's exactly what we did coming out of the civil rights movement. We got into behavior change. We really didn't get into systems change. We did enough equality work just to level set some things, but we never really tackled deeply what was institutionalized in our systems. We just focused on behaviors. There's room to do both, but I would say the dominant thing we ought to be working on is you can get your act together while you're doing something with these systems.
Dwinita, can I take you back to the Capitol for a minute?
Yeah.
Were we looking at white supremacy on steroids? Were those racist people who were storming the Capitol?
I think what we got to see televised was an example of what I'm saying. We got to see white supremacists on TV in a system of white supremacy that allowed it to happen. There was nothing that shut that down. There was nothing that kept them from the insurgents. They were able to go right into the doors of the Capitol.
It was a free-for-all, wasn't it? We watched that thing for hours.
We watched the entire thing. So the system of white supremacy was in place while it entertained white supremacists.
White supremacy was doing violence in a context that was white supremacist. And so it was allowed to flow freely without hindrance.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what I want the audience to be thinking about is how are you seeing that play out at the local level? I know we're talking a lot about what happened at the nation's capital, but this also translates to what's happening in our own backyards, your organizations, your communities. How are you seeing that play out? And I know that ever since George Floyd's murder, and even when we saw the insurgency happen at the nation's capital, I've watched some really interesting things happen in local organizations right here in Colorado. The desire to look like you're doing something without actually doing something.
Say that again.
The desire to look like you're doing something
Without
actually
really doing something.
So to be performative, fakeity.
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 Write that word down. Fakeity.
A lot of fakeity. And so this is what happens when you don't normalize these conversations and you don't normalize these opportunities to talk about what we're going to do. Then we fake it, that we create fakeity. And that is, we say what we care about, but we never do anything to eradicate the issue.
Is fakeity related to activism? That's my word, activism.
Activism. Well, I think fakeity leaves room for activism.
So if you're living in fakeity, you're an activist.
You could be an activist. You could be an activist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We've had a lot of that. We've had a lot of that.
Yeah.
In the last few months.
Well, but I think in the defense of activists and all of the other things that we could come up with, I don't know.
We're very creative,
I don't know that there's a clear strategy for what we're doing. And and some people are probably rolling their eyes or their heads are spinning on their axis right now. But I got to tell you, Dr. Martin Luther King, though not a perfect man, had a strategy.
Sure.
And I don't know that you eradicate racism without a strategy. These isolated episodic strategies at most get a few things done in isolation of other things. But remember, racism is the tying beautifully and intricately of all of our systems.
Yeah.
They're tied together. And so when you're in a vacuum trying to do anti-racism work without looking at how it is related to other systems, it really is not a strategic process. And we've got to, that's our opportunity, I think, in this country. Now that I think we've got equity and racial equity in our sight line, I think a part of this now is what is our strategy now to make sure that we're doing the right anti-racism work that gets at all the systems that are tied together.
It's going to have to get at all the systems.
Right.
And it's even, I guess the most threatening part is most of us are part of most of us belong to a system.
Mhm.
And so if you're not comfortable with change where your system lies,
Mhm.
then you're not going to be comfortable helping to eradicate some of the other systems
That's
as well.
exactly right.
It's very complicated.
It's really complicated. And we think about America being great. I'm going to tell you what it has been really great about. It is tying up and binding up systems to the degree that you can't tell when one starts and where one ends.
Wow.
It is an intricacy and an engineering like nothing I've ever seen before. But there is a connection between every single one of our systems that ties.
And they all work together for the bad.
And they all work. Well, they work together exactly the way they were built.
Our health systems, which tie into our housing, our food,
Yeah.
our transportation.
Yeah. That's the strategy. That the strategy is, have we done enough due diligence? We know what oppression feels like in the system masterfully.
Yeah.
But do we know enough about the intricacies of the tying together of these systems so that we might unravel them? Because the cut that we make in one system can either enhance another system or cut another system down. And I don't know that we've done our work there yet.
When you were saying that, I was thinking about that video that we play often, the scene from The Wizard of Oz.
Mhm.
And when Toto pulls the curtain back, then the man behind the curtain with the red hair who's playing Oz, the wizard, he says, "Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain." It's complicated when you start messing with these supremacist systems. And so that voice is playing over and over for everybody. Pay no attention. Don't mess with it. Leave it alone. And here we are today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here we are today.
We don't know who's behind the curtain in a lot of cases. I think a part of this work that's happening, I'm so proud of all of the activists and organizations that are really focused on this work in Colorado, that they in many ways are doing metaphorically what you're saying, which is pulling back the curtains to see how things are operating. And I think the more we can do that and the more we can share what that is, the more we can see the connections in the systems.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Dwinita, can we talk for a minute about, I was thinking about this as we were preparing for this race talk. Can we compare the Obama, what we call the Obama era, with the Trump era, and where we are now? That would and how do we get to the place where an insurrection would occur, where thousands of people would seek to overthrow the government?
Yeah. So now this is going to sound really strange, but I just got to say it. I believe the hope. I remember what it felt like when Obama became the president. I never thought I would see a Black president in my lifetime, for sure, but there was so much hope in the spirit of this country. But I think the same thing happened with the Trump election. I think there was so much hope in the spirit of this country by white supremacists.
White supremacy was on its way back.
Yes. So I think if you really sort of dissect what was going on there, equal hopes, different reasons, different people but all hope.
So both were hope and change,
Yes.
but it was a different definition of hope
yes.
and a different definition of change.
Yes. And even in the Trump era, I don't know that we ever talked about it in terms of it being hope. But the whole time it was happening, I thought there is a population of people here who see him as their hope.
Do you remember the morning that they announced that he had won the presidency?
Well, I remember I couldn't get out of bed.
Yes. I was sick that day.
Yeah, you were having a hard time.
Yeah. It's interesting. This question just popped up in my head. You definitely have people who see hope and change as something differently depending on what their vantage point is. I know you've done a lot of studying about people who live in the Midwest, Ohio, those areas, East. What is it what is it about this white supremacist system that has caused people who both have hope and want change, but it's a different definition? Let me just break it down like this. What has caused this civil war that we're in now that is going to tear us apart?
Yeah, let's take the slide down and let's talk about this for a minute. I really do believe, because we have not talked about systems of white supremacy enough, people's whole identities are wrapped around these systems. Who you are, who you represent, what you stand for is wrapped around these very white supremacist systems. So when you start talking about change, and you start talking about changing systems, people get personally threatened because their identity is wrapped around those systems. And so then change becomes not a good thing. And that's when you start hearing things like, we'll never give up, we'll never let go. Right?
We'll never concede.
We'll never concede. So the power and the identity of human beings is wrapped around the systems that they have expertise in. BIPOC communities, you know what we have a lot of expertise in? How to navigate oppression in this country.
How to navigate oppression.
Because it's what we've had to do. We have expertise in how to navigate this very oppressive system. Guess what white people have? They have expertise in how to run it and leverage systems of white supremacy that oppress others. Identities are wrapped around that for all groups. And so when you think about a movement that is all about change, I want you to think about what I just said. Everybody's identity comes to play in this. So for some groups, change is great because their identities are wrapped around the very worst parts of this system.
Yeah.
And so for some groups, the notion of change is an absolute threat because their entire identity is wrapped around the power of this system. That's what we're contending with.
Who wins this fight?
I don't know that this is a fight. I think the universe is showing us that it's more than a fight. The infrastructure of our systems is crumbling. That's not fight. That's not human beings. That is systemic crumbling is happening. Things that used to be strongholds don't even make sense anymore. The system is beginning to crumble on itself. And we've talked about this before.
Yes.
These periods in history where you'd have lots of vocals going on about a civil rights issue. Remember when George Floyd was murdered?
Oh,
remember,
my God. Everybody was in the streets.
Everybody was in the streets.
The world was going to change. Racism was going to be eradicated, and George Floyd would get justice.
That's right. Babies that were in Pampers were in the streets. I mean, you name it. And then it went silent. This
deafening
silence.
Silence.
This is a historical social movement trend in this country. Don't act like you're not as old as I am.
Well, let's not talk about that right now.
But we have seen this trend over and over again.
We've seen it.
there's an explosion,
Yes.
and then very quietly we sink back into whatever our normalcy is until the next thing happens. It's a cadence we've been in my entire life. And what it makes us believe is that the issue is over. It's gone, or we've moved on, or we've solved it. And over again, when the new thing crops up, we realize, oh, it wasn't gone, or we didn't solve it. That's what we're in right
Dwinita,
now.
we've got to get this. We've got to get it over to white people, BIPOC, black people, whoever. We've got to get it over that this is not a sprint, but it's a marathon.
It is a marathon, but it needs a strategy.
And it needs a strategy. I remember when, everybody's adrenaline is flowing when the crowds are large and and the bombs are bursting and the smoke is out. Everybody's out and Black Lives Matter. But if there's no strategy, that doesn't last long.
I'm proud of everybody that has done something. Let me just say that.
Absolutely.
This is not just,
something.
I'm all for it. Do something.
Do something.
So I'm really proud of that. But I would say we have to stop being surprised when things continue to crop up. We have to stop being surprised that I remember when over the past 12 months, the number of people that said to me, I just didn't know racism was this bad. I had black people say,
really?
I had black people say, I didn't know racism was this bad.
I thought it was over.
When you moved to the suburbs, racism didn't go away just because you got a new house. I think it has been a stunning scenario for people that saw things explode and then sink back into the soil. Sinking back into the soil is my metaphor for that's the time when things are getting institutionalized. So when the quiet happens, that's when all of that storm sinks into the ground and becomes a part of your systems.
Is white supremacy revitalizing and reorganizing and strengthening itself when it goes down and quiet?
It goes down. It gets institutionalized when it's doing that.
So can I assume by what you're saying is that don't get all happy and cheerful because we're now living under a democratic,
No.
because it's quiet now. And white supremacy is still in place
and
doing what it does.
It's institutionalizing itself. And that's why I want people to think about this as systems. This networked system that in many ways is underground. When that stuff goes underground, it's just strengthening the underground network. These networks, even in our own organizations, get strengthened.
Yes.
When we go dormant in our attention to them. So when I think about strategy for me is to not stop paying attention. Even when things are quiet, don't not pay attention to what the system is doing and what the system is representing, what it's saying and what it's not saying, who's in it and who's not in it. That's our responsibility to do this constant work. This can't be a moment. This has to be a movement, and movement means exactly what the word says, moves. It constantly moves. And where we've gone wrong nationally is our movements are always moments. This can't be a moment.
Our movements are always
moments
where the adrenaline is flowing.
Yes.
We've got to be moving when there aren't crowds.
That's exactly right.
And when it's not on the news.
That's right.
And when nobody seems to be paying attention.
That's right. And that takes some attributes. That takes a lot of commitment.
Dr. Nita, can I ask you, while we're talking about, I know we talked about George Floyd a little bit, as we were watching the insurrection at the Capitol, it felt like white supremacy was piling up on people of color and Black people. We're in a pandemic now.
Mm-hmm.
We're in an economic struggle. We're in a health crisis. All of those systems are terrorizing and killing at high rates people of color and Black people. And then we watched in living color or in white as this insurrection took place where people were yelling, "We're going to take our country back." Can we talk about for just a minute the spiritual, psychological, physical effect of the pileup?
Mhm. Yeah, it is. It is a pileup effect. It is the piling up of all kinds of phenomenons that are happening at one time. And this pileup effect is COVID-19 meets racial reckoning, meets economic challenges that
Sure.
are going on in communities. I mean, you probably can name 5 or 6 different sorts of pileups that are happening at once. But I think it's important to talk about the pileup effect, because the pileup effect will either strengthen us in this movement or weaken us in this movement.
Sure.
And we need to be able to talk about the impact that all of these things are having on us. And I guess the first thing that I would share with you is that I think it's fair to say that we are a country living in compassion fatigue. I keep thinking about
You said compassion fatigue.
compassion fatigue. It's this notion that we are being overexposed to so many things that we need to care about. So we're exposed to needing to care about people's health with COVID-19 and their safety. We're exposed to, there's a racial reckoning going on in this country and we got to do something about it. We're exposed to economic challenges where people don't even have jobs or income. And so we can go on and on about what we're asking people to care about. And the fact that they have so much to care about at one time creates compassion fatigue.
Wow.
It is a weariness. It is being tired of having to care about so many things. And here's the risk factor, which is why I want to talk about it. The risk factor is just like any other kind of fatigue, when we get tired,
Yeah.
what happens to us? We shut down.
We shut down,
Right.
never to rise again.
Right. And so the same thing happens in compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
When you have too much that you're overexposed to needing to care about, you start picking and choosing what you're going to focus on. What we cannot afford to have happen is people picking and choosing to not focus on our racial reckoning.
Right.
Right. And so if people still have the option to pick, would they not pick the hardest thing to say, I can't worry about that right now?
Right.
That's a risk factor for us in this work.
Right.
So I want people to know that compassion fatigue is real, and the real challenge for us is we've got to start talking about what it looks like, because it can show up like apathy,
Yes.
and we don't need that. The other thing I wanted to share very quickly about what we're in right now is grief. I want to show you a slide that talks about grief and the grief cycle. And it's so important to talk about this one too, because while we have compassion fatigue, so many of us are also in the middle of grief for the same reasons. If you happen to be in the BIPOC community, this is not a positive time. It might be a racial reckoning, but the harm in this moment is palpable. So it's not easy. So you grieve in that. And then there are people that are in the COVID-19 grief right now. Lots of losses. I think about the number of funerals you've officiated in less than 12 months.
11 or 12 funerals.
Yeah, it's grief. So the other thing to understand is that while we're going through this journey, this movement, whether it's talking about race all the way to what will we do, which is what we have to talk about. Grief hits all of us, and we're all at different stages in the grief cycle. Some of us are still in denial. We know people in our communities that still don't know why we're talking about all of this.
Right.
And then we know that there are people in our communities that are angry, like you and me. We're angry. We're not hopeless, but sometimes that anger can make you feel really helpless. Once again, I'm entering into my 6th decade of talking about race and racism. I'm exhausted from it. It makes me angry that we're still talking about it. And then some people are in depression because this is so overwhelming to them, the combination of COVID-19 and this racial reckoning. And then we had the insurgency at the nation's capital. The only symbol that some people knew was compromised. that depression keeps you from mobilizing. And then there's some people that are at acceptance, where they're trying to put the puzzle pieces together. I would venture to guess that there are people tonight on this call that are at acceptance. They're trying to make sense of it all so they know what to do next. And then there are some people that's bargaining. And then there's some people at acceptance who have just put a new plan in place and have moved on. And I want you to know that it is reasonable to be in some of those places in our grief in this moment. The world as we once knew it is forever changed. And yet we're being asked to be compassionate and to fight for justice in that grief.
So it's okay to grieve.
It's okay to grieve.
It's okay to move through the stages.
Yeah,
Just keep moving.
but just keep moving.
Just keep going.
Have to keep going. That's it.
Yeah.
We have to keep going.
Yeah. Dr. Nita, we promised at the beginning of this Race Talk event that we would allow persons to raise questions. And so maybe there is have we gotten any questions in? Are there any questions in our Zoom audience? Any comments? Go right ahead.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that. I like that. Somebody wants to know, why can't Black people and white people just work together? That almost sounds like, can't we just all get along?
Well, and I get it.
I get it. Why can't we work together?
Because we haven't solved the issue that keeps us apart. We have not. This again, it's a great question and comment.
Yes.
But it again goes to hearts and minds of people and not systems. I think if you left it up to the devices of relationships, there are tons of Black and white people that could get along.
There are a lot of white people and Black people who work together and get along, but that doesn't, but you cannot ignore that there is a white supremacist system.
Right.
That operates differently on white people and Black people and people of color that we still live in.
Yeah.
And so the problem is not working together, but the problem is, but the effort is for those who are propping up white supremacist systems to take the responsibility of making those systems work for everybody.
That's exactly right. So working together on what would be the question.
Right.
And when we name the what, which is what we're asking people to do.
Right.
Name the what.
Name the what.
And do it and commit to it. Then I think that question that the viewer asked manifests.
Yes.
Yeah. We can't just get along and work on nothing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. How do we create a strategy? And then she said, we need a leader like Dr. King. We've heard this we've heard this before, haven't we, Dr. Dwinita? Address that for me.
We have heard that before, that there's something galvanizing about having a central leader that helps you with the strategy. And I love this question, because I think that is a part of the issue, is there isn't the carrier of a strategy in a way that we're used to historically. So it makes it harder to see what the strategy is. I don't know that we'll ever get to a central leader like we did with Dr. King, but I do think there's such an important role for all of the rising, emerging leaders and existing leaders to be playing in creating a strategy in a collective. I often think sometimes we don't even do that. So between elected officials and the wonderful organizations that are doing this work, are there community strategies that we can document and share about what we're going to do in a collective? Isn't this an opportunity even at the federal level?
Yes.
There's an equity office at the federal level.
Right.
What's the national strategy?
Right.
For racial equity would be an outcome of something like that. So I do think that there are ways that are a little different than having a Dr. King that we could employ, but we have to be willing to interrogate our systems. And therein lies, I think, a part of the challenge is when white supremacy is baked into the degree that it is, getting in to interrogate systems will be a bit of a challenge.
Absolutely.
But we just have to be committed to going forward with that challenge. That's what it's going to take.
Absolutely. We are in a time where there are many leaders. I'm excited about just the leadership pool, even here in Denver, Colorado. And we're never probably going to return back to the time when there was one or two leaders. And I'm of the personal belief that I mean, as celebrated as Brother Malcolm X was, they killed him. As celebrated as Dr. King was, they shot him. White supremacy thinks that if they aim at our leaders, then our movement will stop. And so how confusing it is for white supremacy that there are leaders rising up of every age, every ethnicity, and we just need those leaders to come together. And I believe we're going to be able to change systems, and we'll learn from the lessons, and we will revere the lessons that a Malcolm and a Martin taught us. But many leaders will rise up to take up their mantle.
I agree.
Yep.
Totally agree. What other questions?
Got a question from Sue Evie. How would you suggest that white people learn more about how systemic racism is operating in our local communities?
How would you suggest that white people learn more about how systemic racism is operating in our local communities? I wanted to say sign up for Race Talk University, but go ahead, Dr. Nita, what you?
Yeah, well, I think there are so many opportunities that come in all kinds of forms. One of our favorite books, if you want to talk about it, books, is White Rage.
Yes.
It really talks about how racism is systematized. And I think that's an important starting point for that. I think it's Carol Anderson is the author of that book. So that's a great one for a starting point. And we also love The Color of Law, and because it has some Denver, Colorado inferences.
Right.
It talks about Park Hill a little bit in the read, Richard Rothstein. And that one gets at what I mentioned earlier, and that is the intricacies and how these systems are tied together, so that we more carefully understand those. I also think a simple Google search, and I'm not being sarcastic here because I do this almost weekly, a simple Google search on historical oppressive facts in America will give you bulleted points on all of the different kinds of oppressions that have happened in this country. And I actually think that's an important list for you to start cultivating, because it will help you in that exercise of fast forwarding systemic racism, rolling it forward. Just having historical facts will be helpful there.
Now, my favorite book of all of the books that we've read is White People Really Love Salad by Dr. Nita Mosby Tyler. And I think that if you want to learn how systemic racism plays a role in even our everyday childhood lives, you should get that book. Now, that's the one I like the best.
Thank you, dear.
Yes, dear.
I appreciate
You owe me some money after that.
No, I think I appreciate that
I agree.
question. Yeah. Keep looking at your historical facts and rolling them forward. That's one of the most important things you can do. You'll see the gravity of systemic racism.
Absolutely.
This one's a little packed in.
Mhm.
Throw that one out there. Mary would like to know, how do we change hearts and minds to get them to acknowledge that racism exists and move towards reconciliation, healing, and reparations?
How do we change hearts and minds to get people to believe that racism exists and get them to move towards reparations and reconciliation and healing?
So thank you for that great question.
Great question.
Here's a thought. First, we have to tell ourselves the truth. And I always use the 20-60-20 rule when it comes to truth. So what's going to happen here is 20% of the people already believe it, get it. Everything that you just said, they already understand. That's 20% of us. It might be the people that are on this call tonight. 60% of the people are tentative. They're the ones that are trying to figure it out. They're asking questions just like you just did. They're exploring. That's 60%. And then there are 20% of the people that are not going to be on board with anything that you just said. So what happens to us is we get laser focused on that 20% that don't want to hear what you're talking about. And that becomes our worldview. So I want to invite you to focus on where I think there's the biggest opportunity, and it's that top 80%, the 20 that are already on board with you, and the 60 that are trying to learn and grow together. If we could make a dent in that percentage, I actually think we're in better position to do the work that we've been talking about
I
tonight.
agree. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
I really do think that.
I agree.
How easy would it be to build systems with people that are either already on board or the ones that are wanting to be on board and just need to know how?
And I want to say, Dr. Nita, why you bring it up is I want to say how blessed we are to have the people that are on board, and we celebrate those who desire to be on board. And I agree with you. Even those who just desire to listen, even if they don't know what side of the fence they're going to fall on, at least they're willing to listen.
Yeah, that's such an important part of this.
Yeah.
Is just being willing to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next question, sir.
All right, Reverend Tyler, how can faith communities come together to strategize,
I like that.
attend race talk, yes, they put that in parentheses, and build relationships for a collective change?
How can faith communities come together to strategize? And what was the second part of that? Build relationships for collective change. That's an excellent question, and I thank you for that question. I'm proud to say that I've seen many examples of faith communities coming together to be a part of change and to put their efforts together to see us be able to change systems. And I think that one of the important things, just push that button over there and it'll stop. I promise. Any button. We have an alarm going off in the room. Yes. Does that mean it's time to stop? Anyway, let me get back to my question. I think it is an excellent question, and I've seen many models of people in the faith community. I assume you mean white people, Black people, people of color coming together to solve some of the systemic problems. It can be done, and we've done it in the past. And it really takes a humbling, Dr. Nita and I talked about a space of grace earlier. It takes being able to create a space of grace where people are able to ask the questions that they want to ask. We have people who want to know, what do Black people like to be called? Are you colored? Are you Negro? Are you African American? Are you Black?
No, yes, yes.
No, yes, yes. But it's okay to ask the question. I am blackity black, black, black. It's okay. Spaces of grace allow you to not be ignorant anymore. And so I believe when people of faith come together, we have to pledge to each other that we will be honest, that we will be open. And people of faith also have to admit that even in the faith community, even there is systemic race. In fact, I believe that systemic racism was fueled and created by religious systems. We know that.
Well,
And homophobia and misogyny, all of those things were born out of religious systems. And so we must come together and be willing to give up the systemic hate that we've learned as people of faith and be open to coming together to see systems. We have to be willing to tear down systems and build up systems. I keep saying it, that will serve everybody. Thank you for that question.
Great question.
What would you see as successful components of a good strategy?
Great question. What would I see as successful components of a great strategy? So one, the strategy needs to have a name. I think we're calling things all kinds of things. What are we trying to accomplish here? Is it the ending of white supremacy? Is it racial equity? What is it? So naming what we're trying to do would be an important component. Second, commitment. What is the degree to which we're making a commitment to do this? We don't want something that's performative. So what will we commit to do? So, for instance, when we say we need to interrogate our own systems, when we do that, are we willing to do something with what we learn in this interrogation of our systems? And so the commitment part of this would be important too. Opportunity areas. Where are the 3, 4, 5, 20 things that we can take down in a system that really does give us a system free of white supremacy and racism? What are those things? I call them fences. These are things, the barriers that get in the way. Are we willing to name those and then commit to taking them down? And then I think another part of strategy is honoring the fact that there might be something new that we've never designed before that needs to be architected in the system. And so just because you tear something down doesn't mean that's the answer to the question. It might mean that second step is design thinking and architecting a thing that might be brand new. And we've seen some examples of those kind of things happening. So I think committing to those things would be really important. The sticking power of a strategy is that you commit to that right up front, that we're sticking to the strategy. You don't have to run the risk of people getting competitive about who's doing what or when, because you're doing it as a collective strategy.
Absolutely, as a collective strategy. Sir.
Okay, so the next question is, are there healing spaces for BIPOC individuals to seek help with generational trauma and depression?
Wow. Yes, there are healing spaces. We have a very good friend by the name of that's Kathy Phelps. Kathy Phelps, and she is a I want to say she's a therapist, and she has a whole group of people who deal with people of color, BIPOC people who are dealing with trauma and stress in their lives. And we can get you her information. You can just, what would be the best way to get?
Yeah, I would go to the Center for Trauma and Resilience.
Center for Trauma and Resilience.
It's the website, and they do beautiful work. And you were in a leadership program that really centered on healing and
yes,
leaders.
TLC was a group that I'm proud that I graduated from in their cohort, and it was a wonderful model of a cohort that these were leaders, nonprofit leaders. I think I probably was the only preacher in there, but it was a group of leaders of color, and we really spent about half a year dealing with our stresses, dealing with the things that white supremacy has placed on us as leaders. And it was a healing experience just to be with each other and to share and to learn exercises to I want to say to get to our woosah, but a place of comfort and a place of peace. So I recommend TLC. From time to time, you'll see the cohort advertising for those who'd like to be a part of it, and I recommend it very highly.
The other thing I recommend, and I've started doing this in my own networks, it's not a formal way to do this, but the more you can form your own circles of people to do this work with is important too. The intimacy sometimes of the circle matters a great deal. So there are formal systems, and we certainly don't know every group that's doing this work, but there's also this wonderful opportunity for you to start forming your own circles. That's what I have personally done with a group of women, very diverse women, that gives me a space to be able to talk about racial trauma and beyond, and solutions for how I might navigate this system as we're starting to broach this racial reckoning in a different way.
Can I also, I think that I would probably be negligent as a pastor if I didn't plug the fact that my own spiritual home, Shorter Community AME Church, we've been out of our physical space for 1 year now. And so we've had to virtually come together. I think the only time we really see each other in person is at the COVID-19 vaccine clinic that we've set up at Shorter Church with UC Health. And I just want to say that my own spiritual family, my church family, has been a source of strength for both Dr. Dwinita and I in this pandemic. And so I do recommend highly that if you can find a spiritual home where people are real and genuine and loving and accepting and open, then that's always a good place to start when you're looking for strength to do this work.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that question.
Got a question as we approach 7:30. The question I have: you guys characterize the Obama and Trump era as eras that were moments where people kind of were looking towards change and hope. So as we're slipping into, I guess, what we're going to call the Biden era, what would you characterize the tone that we're in right now as a society and our country?
So the question is, if the Obama and Trump eras were described as hope and change, different definitions of hope and different definitions of change, how would you describe the Biden era? I'll let you take that, Dr. Dwinita.
Somehow I knew you
I'm
were going to
interested in
do
the
that.
answer.
I think the Biden era is show me. I think it's the show me era. I think it is, we've moved from hope to show me and prove it to me.
Yeah.
And so this is, we're down to commitment level now. I need, this is like, I always talk about, we need less nouns and more verbs.
Yes.
This is one of those moments where we're looking for verbs. What are the actions?
Yes.
And people are waiting to be shown what those are going to be. That's
Yes.
that's the world according to Dwinita.
Yes. Wow. And
What do you think?
I think that it's but the first thing I want to say is that it seems to be an era of rest, because we're not waking up every day wondering what tomfoolery has happened.
No, I think you're right.
But at the same time, I think that we're in an era where if we're not careful, we're going to be lulled to sleep. I remember when the resistance started. Shorter Community AME Church is the spiritual home of our community resistance. And we brought 51 different progressive organizations together to come up with a strategy for fighting white supremacist systems. And I think that the Biden era will be dangerous for us if we come out of our resistance stance and play like the systems no longer exist, as you say.
Yeah.
And so I think it's an era of mental rest, but I think it's going to be an era. The ancestors in the Black church used to say, "I'm going to watch, fight, and pray." And so while we're praying, we better watch and fight as well. Mm-hmm. Keep our guard up and keep fighting to tear down systems that are still uniquely in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So important.
Yeah.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left. I thought we might just wrap up with some closing words for the audience.
I thought you were going to ask me to sing a solo.
No, we're not going to ask you to sing a solo. Okay, wait a minute. We have one more question.
Okay, one more question. I was getting ready to sing.
Okay.
Okay.
It says, what gives you hope for change after doing this work for so long?
Wow, I love that.
Repeat it.
What gives you hope and change for change after doing this work for so long? Can I say that for me, and I'll let you answer. Mm-hmm. For me, it's my mother. Mm-hmm. My mother's 83 years old. She was active in the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. My mother and father were the last people to see Medgar Evers the night that he was gunned down. They left the meeting and they had spoken with him. And the next day they had heard that he had been gunned down in front of his home. My mother at 83 is still excited. She's excited to vote. She lives in Georgia, so she was excited about a new president, about the first Black Senate. My mother at 83, having gone through the civil rights movement, fighting and in pain and assaulted, is still excited for change. And so every day, Dr. Dwinita, when I wake up, I say to myself, if my mother, who has been doing this work for 83 years, can be excited, I'm going to hold on till my change comes.
Yeah. I share that excitement with you and my mother-in-law too. I think the thing that keeps me excited is younger generations that are seeing justice work as their responsibility and not an option. I think in my lifetime, I've been through all of the major movements, and sometimes this work was just optional for people. And I think that our young people are hardwired for it to be a necessity and a commitment. And so I'm really empowered to know that young people are not going to go to sleep on this, and that in fact, they might be the answer and the solution and the hope that I have in this season of my life, that I might in fact see some signs of racial equity happen before I die. I'm really excited about that.
Can I also say that waking up every morning and seeing the hope in your face always gives me hope that this work is worth it?
Thank
Thought I would throw that in. Yes.
you.
We want to say to you tonight, we want to say to you, thank you for joining us on this special conversation. Again, if you'd like to register for Race Talk, you can go to shortercommunityame.org. I believe so. You can go to the website and fill out the application. We will get back to you by right after the 28th. Also, we're very excited. Dr. Anita and I are going to be adjunct professors at Iliff School of Theology. We're going to be teaching race talk to seminarians. And so we're very excited about that. If you're a student at Iliff, come take our class. It's going to be great. It's going to be exciting. Thank you for spending this time with us. Dr. Dwinita, do you want to say anything before we leave?
Thank you. And remember, this is not a moment. This is
not a moment. This is a movement.
Yeah.
Thank you. God bless.